We're going to ask a series of questions to each of the candidates. We're going to start on the left with Mr. Cobbs and work our way across the candidates. The first question is going to be 2 minutes. The following questions are going to be 1.5 minutes. At the 1 minute mark, I will let the candidates know that they have either 1 minute or 30 seconds, depending on the question remaining. And then at that time, we will move down the next candidate who answers the same question, so on and so forth. The next question, we'll move our way down. So I guess the last thing I want to say is I would appreciate it if no one would applaud or comment. We want to work through the questions as quickly as possible. There are any distractions. We want to hear what they have to say. So thank you. We'll get started. Bill, tell us about your personal, educational, and professional background. You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, born and raised in the city of Detroit. Went to Detroit Public Schools. When I finished high school, my folks had enough money to send me to school for Okay, how's that? When I finished high school, my folks had enough money to send me to school for a year. When that year was over, I ended up in the United States Navy. I always tell folks that the Navy was really the catalyst for the rest of my life. I was fortunate enough to be selected for the Navy's Boost program, broadened opportunities for officer selection and training. That program allowed me to go back to university and complete my undergraduate education. And once I completed my service to the Navy, I got accepted to Wayne State University Law School. Came home to Detroit and started law school. And was a Detroit cop while I was working my way through law school.
Abdul, same question to you. Tell us about your professional, educational, and personal background.
All right, good afternoon. All right, well, let me tell you actually just about my uncle and then let him talk about why I'm doing this. I've got one of my favorite uncles. His name is Rick. And Uncle Rick was the guy who, he would take us snowmobiling in the winter. He would take us jet skiing and water skiing in the summer. And he went as far as to learn how to prepare the venison that he would hunt in November as halal so that my family could eat it. And my Uncle Rick voted for Donald Trump. And you got to imagine the conversation that he and I shared after that, right? I'm Muslim, and Donald Trump said some pretty mean things about Muslims. And the conversation was about why somebody like my uncle would vote for him. Well, my uncle's a truck driver, and he'd been driving a truck his whole life. He built himself a business that in 2008 went bust. And he was in a position where he had to lay off people he knew and loved, people whose dinners every day he was responsible for as an employer. And that's why he voted for Donald Trump, because he felt like people in our party weren't paying attention to the fact that while top line measures said that the economy was back, when you look at the kinds of things that people feel in their pocketbooks, whether it's a real wage, whether it's access to the economy, it's not really back. I'm running for people like my Uncle Rick, and I'm also running for people like DeMarcus, a 3-year-old little boy I had the opportunity to serve while I was at the Detroit Health Department. He was the 4th child of a 21-year-old mom. He met his father maybe 4 times in his life because his dad's in jail. And when I was rebuilding Detroit's health department, we tried to focus on him as an end user. What we could do to break down barriers that children like him had to being able to learn and earn. That led us to doing things like guaranteeing kids glasses, doing things like standing up to big corporate polluters, making sure that our kids weren't drinking leaded water in their schools by creating the country's first citywide protocol to have every single school, daycare, and Head Start tested for leaded water. When we ask ourselves where we are now, we need leadership that is able to solve problems, that brings progressive values to those challenges that we face. And I'm running to do that. I think my background has prepared me well as a public servant, somebody who's a physician, a scientist, and an educator, and somebody who believes in government because I've seen it from so many different perspectives. I look forward to this conversation, and Sheikh, thank you for hosting.
Sri, tell us about your personal, educational, and professional background.
Good afternoon, how are you everybody? My name is Shri Tanagar. If you remember only Shri today, that would be great, SHRI. My website is Shri 2018. 2018 is the year Democrats must win the governorship. I'm a scientist, so I have a bachelor bachelor's degree in chemistry, a master's, and a PhD degree in chemistry. Chemists and scientists are the ones that understand climate change. Chemists understand why we must keep our Great Lakes clean and pure. And scientists understand why we must shut down Line 5 right now. There's a rumor that I came to this country with $20 in my pocket, and it's not true. I had $16. I had a couple of beers on the plane. Immigrated in 1979, became a proud United States citizen in 1988. Last 26 years, I have been creating jobs in America. I've created hundreds of jobs. I'm a small business owner, not like someone like Trump whose daddy gave him $14 million. Not like Rick Snyder who got billions of dollars of gateway to manage, which you know he screwed it up. Right? So I ran small businesses, created hundreds of jobs. I'm probably the only candidate here who has signed the front of the paycheck and created jobs. And that's one of the major things I bring as a governor candidate. I will ensure we have a strong economy, we create good paying jobs. I've grown up in India under poverty. I've lived, I knew how it feels to go to bed hungry. I worked as a janitor during my high school. And I raised 2 boys as a single father when my spouse died. So I understand where Michiganders are and the issues that they face. I will be a governor that will not be beholden to corporate money and dark money. Thank you. I have made a pledge not to accept corporate money, and I have invited other candidates to do the same. Thank you.
Gretchen, can you tell us about your personal, educational, and professional background?
Yes, of course. Thank you so much. I apologize for walking in late to my colleagues up here at the table and to all of you. Appreciate the invitation to join all of you today. I am thrilled to be here with you. I love the state of Michigan. I am a proud Michigander. And I look around at the state that my kids and your kids are growing up in, and in a lot of ways, it doesn't even resemble the Michigan that I think of when I talk about my Michigan pride. There was a point in time where our schools were the finest you could find around. Yes, that's right. Where people packed up their families and they moved up here from Kentucky and Tennessee or even halfway around the world to our Michigan because you could live a great quality of life here and get paid enough to buy the car you were making and raise your family up and retire in this state with dignity. And there was a point in time where we lived up to our motto, the Great Lakes State, by protecting our resources and ensuring people have access to clean, quality water. And right now, as I look around at our Michigan, it doesn't even reflect those things anymore in a lot of ways. And I'm worried about it. Now, some of you know me because we have been on the front line together on a lot of tough fights, whether it was fighting back when the governor and the Republicans tried to eliminate collective bargaining, or it was fighting back on attacks to our rights or cuts to our kids' schools. But for those of you who don't know me, I just want you to know that I have dedicated my life to serving the people of this state. I am a fighter. I am eager to take on the tough fights that we need to as a state. Because here's what I know. It's been a long time since Michiganders have had someone in their corner. Michigan deserves better. And I believe that together we can grow our economy in a way that our family incomes grow along with it. That we can prepare our children to succeed. And we can start holding people accountable. I'm eager to work with anyone who wants to solve problems in Michigan, and I'm ready to take on anyone who stands in our way. Thank you.
Abdul, if elected, what can or will you do to address the inequities associated with gerrymandering?
Yeah, so first and foremost, can I see anybody who is working to get our ballot petition through? Any of the folks and voters, not politicians. So first of all, if you have not talked to these good people with their hands up, hands up. If you have not talked to them, make sure you do by the end of this day, and let's make sure that we get an opportunity to vote on being able to address the fact that our state has been cut up. So a big round of applause for them. Thank you for doing that. Look, 2020 is going to be a really important year. Whoever is governor, and be that person a Democrat, that person is going to have the opportunity to decide whether or not we're going to keep playing this ridiculous game of football where we re-gerrymander every single direction every time a different party's in power, or we commit ourselves to the long term of having an independent, bipartisan, mathematical system of redistricting that makes sure that we have every single legislative district in play. At the end of the day, the system of gerrymandering that we have is undemocratic. It takes votes away from people. It tells people what direction they're going to go because it packs people and cracks people into these overwrought legislative districts. So I will do everything in my power to guarantee, if I'm governor, that this state will be fair and open, that it leads to the kind of democracy that dignifies the best issues that we need to be able to solve as a state. And I do hope that, that this ballot petition passes because it would take that out of my hands and put it in the hands of the people.
Shri, same question to you. If elected, what can or will you do to address the inequities associated with gerrymandering?
Well, I'm fully supportive of the Voters Not Politicians initiative. I think we have 260,000 signatures collected so far. Great work. We are very close. I think we'll have to get about 400,000 signatures to put that on the ballot. And I think the greater issue is democracy. And certainly the gerrymandering is anti-democracy. But you also see a number of other things that have been done by Republicans to suppress voting. And that should not be allowed. I would like to make it easy for us to be able to vote. We should be able to vote party line if we so choose, and if our voters so choose. I want to make registration to vote a simple process. So when you go to the Secretary of State, get your driver's license, you automatically get registered to vote. And I want to make it easy because we are the world's strongest democracy, we are the world's best democracy, and we must not allow any attempt to undermine our democracy by the Republicans.
Congratulations.
Well, thank you. I think this is an important question, something that I talk about everywhere that I go across the state, because we are all feeling the effects of gerrymandering, but we're feeling the effects of a government that's just not accountable to the people anymore. And it manifests itself in a lot of different ways. And gerrymandering is one contributing factor. But you know, we've got to take Michigan from dead last when it comes to ethics and transparency to first in this nation by holding people accountable, by ensuring that no governor or lieutenant governor or attorney general can ever have a conspiracy of silence when the public is drinking water that is poison. That we need to know what the people who work for us are doing so we can hold them accountable. Gerrymandering is one piece that plays into that. When I took my oath of office as the Senate Democratic leader, I looked around that Senate of 38 members and saw that despite the fact that Democrats had earned 50% of the total votes cast in that election, I was the leader of 12 out of a body of 38. Because of gerrymandering, the Republicans have a 26-person majority in the Senate at that time, which is a supermajority, which means most of those seats are decided in a Republican primary. And so we've got about 7% of our population making the rules for all of us. And it's wrong. And it's created this environment where they can get away with continuing to beef up campaign finance limits, lack of accountability. We've got a lot of work to do on all of these fronts, but I'm grateful for the work that Voters Not Politicians is doing, because it is time for the voters to be selecting our leaders and not the other way around.
The next Democratic governor of Michigan has got to be prepared to fight on every single front, whether it's through the legislative process, whether it's through the petition process. They've got to be willing to stand up and say, this is enough of this. We have an opportunity right now with the decision that came down in Wisconsin to leverage our fight in the courts. The governor's got to be prepared to be part of that fight in court with our next Democratic Attorney General, and also make sure that we're doing everything we can during the next districting process in the state to make sure that the citizens' votes are what matter. That we're not allowing someone to take a partisan position regarding districting and slant how our legislative body looks by virtue of that.
Thank you. Shree, recently drug overdoses have become the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 50 years old. Opiates are devastating our rural communities, in particular up here in northern Michigan. Who is responsible and how do we curtail the epidemic?
Well, a number of things. I think the opioid crisis has not been something that well addressed by Attorney General Schuette. For the last 2 decades, we've been putting people, this has become a law enforcement issue, and it should not be a law enforcement issue. We need compassion, we need rehab, we need counseling. The victims, the people who are addicted to prescription drugs need to be looked at as somebody that needs help in terms of getting rid of that addiction and should not be locked up and should be provided every help they can get. Now here is a thing about big corporations and the big pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies who are pushing these drugs on us and the people. You know, my friend's daughter, she got her wisdom tooth pulled out and she got 2 prescriptions of oxycodone. It's something that could be handled with a much less potent drug. And just the pill mills and the doctors over-prescribing these. Again, all this happens because we have put in this state profits over people. And the corporations are able to get away, and we must close down these pill mills, take action against the doctors who prescribe these medicines, and we must curtail the influence of pharmaceutical companies. This is a rehab and compassion issue. Let's help people who are addicted.
Thank you. Gretchen?
Well, thank you. You know, I served as prosecutor in Ingham County for a stint when my prosecutor got caught up in a scandal and the judges in my county asked me to come in and clean up our prosecutor's office. And one of the things that I did just a few days in was a ride-along with the Lansing Police Department. And there was a call that came in and we picked up a man who was distraught and driving around town with a lot of weapons in his car. We came to find out that this is a Purple Heart veteran of the Iraq War. And obviously this was a man with severe PTSD who needed assistance. And the only question was, what do we do? Do we take him to jail or do we take him to the emergency room? Because we don't have enough resources to help people that are really struggling, whether it's with addiction or it is with mental health issues in Michigan. Now, as we look to the magnitude of this problem, we know that there are more people who die in Michigan every year from gun deaths. I'm sorry, from opioid deaths than gun deaths in Michigan. There are more people who die from opioid deaths than car accidents in Michigan. This is a crisis, and it is a disease, and it means we've got to adopt a real forward-looking, aggressive plan to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable, the medical community accountable, and make sure we provide treatment for people. And what we can't do is elect a governor like Bill Schuette, who has turned a blind eye to, not just a blind eye to the pharmaceutical industry, but who's actually helped them by pushing legislation that keeps us from having the ability to sue them when they create a drug that hurts our families. We need a real advocate on behalf of people in our state. And I know anyone on this panel would do better than he, but this is a real high stakes for people all across the state because of the magnitude of this crisis that we're facing. And it's going to take tough leadership to address it and give people the kind of hope that we need in Michigan.
Thank you. Bill?
As a former member of the Michigan law enforcement community, the one thing I know for sure is that this is not an issue that we're going to fix by criminalizing. You know, we've got to take two approaches to resolving this problem in Michigan. The first, we've got to have an attorney general and a governor that's willing to take pharmaceutical companies on head on and launch civil litigation against them so that they are actually being hit where it counts for them, in the pocket. Because unless we do that, anything else is meaningless. The second thing is we have decimated mental health in the state. And mental health is going to be a critical part to alleviating the opiate addiction thing that we're facing in the state right now. We've got to restore mental health in the state and make sure that we're not continuing this march down the road to privatization in that area. If we focus on getting the pharmaceutical companies to accept their responsibility for this problem and also make sure that we have the ability to deliver the services that folks that are suffering from opioid addiction need, then we can begin to make progress in curing this problem in the state.
Thank you.
So I'm a doctor and my wife is a psychiatrist. There's not a day that goes by that we don't talk about how this epidemic is fundamentally changing the fabric of rural communities. And you know, a lot of folks have talked about a lot of great solutions. I want to pinpoint a couple. I remember being in medical school where they used to teach us that pain was the 6th vital sign. And you know, you'd see these handouts and they'd be pushed by the pharmaceutical industry. There was a responsibility for the House of Medicine and the pharmaceutical industry to get right on this issue. We do need a governor, we do need an attorney general who are going to stand up to them. As a physician myself, I know exactly what treatment guidelines mean and what it will take for us to build the institutional infrastructure to deal with this the right way. We also have to talk about the fact that when we institutionalized psychiatric care and mental health care back in the 80s, we delivered a tax cut under Governor Engler, in the 90s, we delivered a tax cut under Engler when really we were supposed to use that money to build out the outpatient infrastructure that was supposed to treat things like this. Then I also want to talk about stigma, right? Not a person in this room can go more than 2 degrees of separation from somebody who suffered at the hands of this epidemic. But oftentimes it's one thing for us to recognize that the people in our families are suffering, and then when we think about it at a societal level, it's still easy to get in the mindset that ultimately ends up criminalizing drug use. And there's a responsibility for us to step up and say, even if that's not my loved one, that person is somebody else's loved one. And we together have to stand up and recognize that that stigma is what's driving a lot of the overdoses and a lot of the use that we're seeing right now. And we have a real responsibility as a society to have that empathy to recognize that yes, we have to deal with this challenge, but it means embracing people who are suffering from it rather than having the kinds of attitudes where we blame them for their own disease. And I hope that as a doctor I can bring that kind of empathy to our social policy around this issue.
Thank you. Gretchen, what is your position on decommissioning Line 5?
Yes, so thank you. This is a question that comes up all over the state, not just when you're in northern Michigan. Because here's what we Michiganders know, is that water not just defines our borders, but it defines who we are. And as we see this great state that is home to 20% of the world's fresh water, we are such poor managers and stewards of that water. Because of that, we have got a company that pulls out as much water out of the ground as they want without paying for it. We've got communities with algae blooms, and we've got a pipeline going underneath the Straits of Mackinac. We've got to get the oil out of the water. And I think what it's going to take is a real strategic legal plan to make sure that it's a reality, because we are up against Enbridge on this one. And it's not going to be a simple thing of just turning a spigot. We've got to have a real strategy of going in so that we get that pipeline out of the Great Lakes as soon as possible. One of the things that I am absolutely committed to is making sure that we harness the great assets of our state. We've got brains, we've got research universities, we've got Midwestern grit, and we've got water. We shouldn't be the worst stewards of water around. We should be the finest stewards. We should be setting the world standards. And that's the kind of leadership that I'm ready to put into work for the people of this state, so that we protect the thing that is a commodity the rest of the world is going to be looking for, our water.
Thank you. Bill?
Day one, shutting down Enbridge becomes a priority. You know, allowing Enbridge to continue to operate is like taking a gun that's got 6 bullets in it, putting it up to your head, and thinking that when you pull the trigger, nothing is going to happen. We know that Enbridge is just an accident waiting to happen. Enbridge doesn't have a remedial process, nor does the Coast Guard. And if Enbridge were to leak today, it would spill 1.5 million gallons of oil in the Straits before anybody knew anything about it. I don't know about you, but there's nothing for us to study. We've done all the studies that need to be done. That pipeline needs to be closed immediately. You know, here's the good news, folks. Gretchen was right. We're surrounded by 20% of the entire Earth's freshwater supply. And if you have been paying attention to what's going on in the world, there's a worldwide freshwater shortage projected by the year 2030. Michigan is positioned to be the destination state in this country if we just don't screw it up. The water is our future. And if we don't take care of it, we don't have a future. So the next government of the state has got to be prepared to take immediate action and not worry about a Canadian company and Canadian oil being impacted by us taking that action.
Yeah, I just want to think a little bit about the clinical scenario. You've got a patient coming in with a heart attack, and you say, well, maybe we could run a couple more tests, right? This is not something that is so complex that we need to study it into oblivion. There is only one right answer to this question, and it is that we need to shut this thing down immediately. You as Enbridge can show me why it is that you think you're safe, but this is a line that was built in 1953. I want you guys to think about what was happening in 1953. We had just developed a vaccine for polio in 1953. Right? These are very different times, and we're allowing this thing that's 13 years past due to continue to pump gallons and gallons of oil through the Straits of Mackinac, which can connect Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. That if it was going to actually, if something bad were to happen, you would then poison probably about 15% of the world's fresh water just in those 2 lakes alone. And in the moments that you actually had the ability to see what had happened, it's too late. You can't put toothpaste back into a bottle. Right? So this is not something that is so complex that we need to sit down and study. As a scientist, I agree that you have to have a cool, rational approach to certain things. But you know what? That doesn't stop you that when your patient comes in with a heart attack, you then do something and then you ask questions later. This is one of those moments, and we as a state have the decision about whether or not we are going to do what it takes to protect our greatest resource, which is that 21% of the world's fresh water, or we're going to sit back and let some, like you said, Canadian corporation dictate to us what that water means to us, and I'm not willing to stand by. So we shut that thing down immediately, and then we ask questions.
Well, I think this is one position that Senator Gretchen Whitmer and me differ and we are on the opposite end of it. You know, one of the things that we see is when career politicians talk, and we see that with Bill Schuette as well. You know, there is always this hedging and uncertainty, and let's study this and let's study that. And behind all of that, if you really pay attention, because politicians like to tell us, career politicians like to tell us what we want to hear. And when they give to Lansing, they start paying to their donors. And here is a big corporate influence that we are trying to avoid. There is so much money in politics, there is so much money in our government, and there are special interests and there are corporations who are dead against closing line 5. We know that. And our career politicians who are beholden to these corporations will not act. Bill Schuette has not acted. He had every right to drag Enbridge in the courts and enforce our easement agreement. He has not acted. This is really what we get from the politicians, and this is what is happening with the corporate influence. And I say we close down line 5 immediately, right now.
Bill, the Detroit Free Press reports that Bill Schuette is the leading Republican candidate. Schuette is a well-established, well-financed, well-connected politician. Why and how are you best suited to defeat Bill Schuette next November?
So, we have 10 months and 14 days to the Democratic primary. We have 12 months and 17 days to the general election. And here's what I say to Democrats in this state. We have today a very fractured party. And every single day that we spend not focusing on the most important thing, and that is winning the governor's race next year, is a moment wasted. So, why me? It's very simple. You know, there are two things that as Democrats we have to think about for next year. The first is, does the candidate that we put forward have a real plan for moving the state of Michigan forward? Secondly, is that a candidate that can go toe-to-toe with Bill Schuette and win? Any other consideration is meaningless. Any other consideration is meaningless. Now, why that person is me, I respect everybody sitting up here. But I've had a lifetime of getting prepared to be a leader. You know, people talk about Bill Gadsby's a business person. That's not true. Let me explain to you who I am. I'm the only person sitting on this panel today that's ever done a day's work in a factory. I'm the only person sitting on this panel who's probably ever belonged to a labor union and understands what that means. I'm the only person sitting on this panel today that's ever served this country in uniform. I'm the only person sitting on this panel today that's ever been a member of the Michigan law enforcement community. So I didn't start out my life as a business person. That's chapter 2. There was a chapter 1. This will be, as the next governor of the state of Michigan, chapter 3.
Look, I, like all of you, have been sick of hearing about 2016. But we ask ourselves in this moment, how is it that we take back this state? How is it that we can believe in the more just, more equitable, more sustainable world that we know Democrats can promise year in and year out? If you look at what happened, though, in the past, we have failed to actually articulate a message that is about what we can do rather than what the other people can't. And I think there's a responsibility right now for us to ask ourselves whether or not we are willing to trust our future, whether or not we are willing to actually embrace the idea that we don't have to apologize for what we believe in, that the only way we win is when we present candidates who actually can get up and inspire people to believe again. If you look at where we are as a party, right? The coalition of the ascendant, as they call it, they are disproportionately young, they are disproportionately in communities of color, and they're disproportionately progressive. There is no doubt that we look different and we have to embrace that. People are asking, where are young people? Well, I'll tell you, they're working on my campaign. We've got 2,500 active volunteers, half of them under the age of 35. They've knocked on 80,000 doors. We're signing up 50% of anybody who's heard me speak to volunteer with this campaign. That kind of energy, that kind of enthusiasm is what it means to play to win. This is the only movement that's being built up here. I'll also just talk about brass tacks. I'm the only person on this panel right now who's ever served in an executive leadership role, in an operational role in government. Right now we're talking about experience. People ask a lot about experience. I think there's two ways of thinking about it. What you've delivered and how long you've been there to deliver it. If we want somebody who's delivered a little bit in a lot of time, I'm probably not the right guy. But if we want somebody who's delivered a lot in a little bit of time, I probably am. And I think that leadership experience is what's culminating into the kind of movement that we're building all over the state across 90 cities and 45 counties that we've visited. So right now the question is, do we stand up and embrace a future that reminds us that that more equitable, more just, more sustainable Michigan, that it is something we can reach out to grasp if we're willing to do it.
As not being a career politician, I can contrast myself perfectly well against Bill Schuette. Bill Schuette, like a typical Lansing politician, has lived off paycheck on taxpayers' money. I think he started running for governor in 3rd grade. I have been in private sector, I have been an entrepreneur, I have been creating jobs. All Bill Schuette has worried about is his own job last 31 years. So we are not going to win by putting a 15-year career politician against a 31-year experienced career politician. He is beholden to corporations. Many of our Lansing politicians, they get their money from who? Big insurance companies, pharmaceutical companies, right? And these politicians, year after year, have this loyalty built for big corporations. I have taken a pledge not to take corporate money. And I will contrast my experience about that, my belief against someone like a Bill Schuette. Senator Whitmer may not be able to do that comparison, having herself taken corporate PAC money. I have lived in poverty. I know how 22% of Michiganders suffer to put food on the table, take care of their health insurance. I will insist and we will work for Medicare for all. And anyone who is supported by insurance companies will not be able to say that. I will work and make sure every Michigander is covered under health care. And so I will bring a strongest contrast. I have 26 years of experience running small businesses, creating jobs. I'm a scientist. I understand the Great Lakes problem, the line pipe problem, keeping our environment clean, holding corporations accountable when they pollute our air and they pollute our soil. So I'm a fighter. I have dealt with adversities all my life. I will not give up. And I will fight for Michigan. And I put my own money into my campaign because I believe in this. And so I will be perfectly well funded to run a statewide strong campaign. I think one thing we need to do is Democrats like to do the same old, and expect different results. In 2014, we put Mark Schauer, a good man, but had no appeal to the independents and the swing voters. And with Senator Whitmer, with all my due respect to her, also does not have an appeal to the independents. With my financial savvy and having run, because next 4 years, we are going to have a recession, whether we want it or not. And we need a financial savvy person. And with my independent background, the independents and the swing voters, I will have a great appeal. So I'll put a coalition together of the traditional Democrats, the progressives, the independents and the swing voters and win this election for the Democrats.
Thank you.
So I jumped in this race on January 3rd, and I think a lot of people wonder, do we have to start talking about the next election already? And unequivocally, the answer is yes. I have spent the last 10 months traveling this great state of ours, getting into communities that Democrats usually don't even travel to, much less make a priority. Because here's what I know. Everyone in this state is important. We cannot take any one or any vote or any community for granted. We've got to run a race like none we've run in quite a while. Because you can't win an election just by beating up the other candidate. You can't win an election by telling people why they're not worth your vote when you don't have an aspirational message. I believe that we can make this the state that people move to again, where we educate our kids so they are prepared to succeed, where every Michigander has a path to a high-wage skill so that they can make enough money to take care of their families, and where we hold people accountable. And that's what I'm engaging with people all across the state. Whether you're in Gogibbet County on the western end of the UP or you're downtown Detroit, these are the fundamentals that we as Democrats stand for and that we as Michiganders need more than ever. I am ready to go toe-to-toe with Bill Schuette or any Republican that they put up, because for 14 years I did that every single day in the legislature. I know we never sacrificed our values, and that's why I went all the way into the end of the night fighting these guys when they tried to take away collective bargaining rights, when they tried to stand in between women and our doctors, when they tried to attack members of the LGBT community or take away environmental protections. I'm ready to take them on. But I also know what it takes to get something done for the people. When Governor Snyder said he wanted to expand Medicaid to Michigan, I'm the first one who got to the table with him, and we negotiated the details. So now 630,000 Michiganders have coverage who didn't before. We need people who are true to our values, but know how to get things done, because the magnitude of the problems that we face in this state, it's huge. And it is urgent that we get to solving them. And going in on day one and getting things done is going to be more important in this election than ever. And I'm telling you right now, we have a plan to move this state forward for the people who live in it, and I'm excited about it. And that's what I see as I get around the state. That's how we beat Bill Schuette.
Thank you. For years, rural schools have lost students, and as a result lost a disproportionate amount of funding from the state. That has resulted in school closings, teacher layoffs, and large class sizes. How can you ensure adequate and equitable funding for rural schools with declining populations?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. There is no future for Michigan where we don't invest in people and expect them to stand up and be able to build the kinds of businesses that are distributed statewide that really have to be the future of a sustainable state in a moment where automation and offshoring are gutting the traditional Michigan economy. To be able to do that, we have to invest in school districts like rural and also urban school districts that face a lot of the same challenges. To me, that looks a couple of ways. Number one, we have to raise the per pupil per year allocation for public education. We spend less than any other Midwestern state. We have to also adjust the fact that between villages and our state funding formula, there's a $10,000 potential per pupil swing in how much we invest in young minds in the communities that need it most. And we have to correct that gap at the state level and encourage at the local level as well. One of the big things that I've seen both in rural and urban communities is also the fact that we have a huge school infrastructure gap. You have schools that have buildings they don't use because they've declined in the number of students who are there, and then they can't keep up the schools that they do use. So what we have to do is use what they have but don't need and turn it into what they need and don't have. And our idea is to build a school infrastructure bank that would buy out those rural schools that are not being used and invest that capital in improving the schools that do exist. And we have to dignify teachers again, and that means dignifying students. That means giving them the kinds of wraparound services that they need to focus on being students so that teachers can focus on being teachers. And then lastly, we have to remember that teachers go to school to become teachers because they believe in their craft and they know how to do it best. And right now, we've been dictating education policy to teachers rather than allowing teachers and students and parents to come together locally and decide what it is that they're going to do in their classes. I'm an educator, I come from a family of educators. I used to teach a class at Columbia where I got to write my own textbook and teach what I was passionate about. Now, we have to empower our teachers to have autonomy in their classes because great teachers don't just present material. Great teachers inspire students to be able to want to learn that. If we are willing to empower our teachers again, we might have the opportunity to inspire young people to go back into this incredible profession. And if we do that, we know we're doing something right, and that's the plan.
Thank you. Sri?
I met two teachers, Judy and Rachel, in Farmington School District. And they had tears in their eyes when they're talking to me about the excessive testing that goes on. They talked about not being respected. They talked about being humiliated. Judy told me that her salary hasn't changed for the last 10 years. And yet I saw these two teachers buying supplies out of money from their own pockets for their schools. And this is no way to run our school system. We have dropped from the 10th best to 32nd now. We must invest. We put $41,000 per prisoner and we spend $8,000 per student. And that is not right. I'll make sure that we invest money into our education. We respect our teachers. We treat them like professionals. We pay them like professionals. And we take care of their pensions and their retirement. And we fix our education because education was ladder for me to come out of poverty. And that ladder is broken for too many people. And we need to convert our schools into community centers so people that are under poverty are able to take advantage of that, and we need to focus on that. I want to bring universal pre-K to Michigan. Because the child starts learning. I just had a grandchild, he's 6 months old, and I know children start learning at a very early age. And if we can do a universal pre-K, that would not only invest in our children, but we will also help the working parents.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. So when I was in the legislature, I'll tell you, we saw so many debates on education, and very rarely would any of the people casting votes that impact all of our kids' schools even have a child in the public schools or even step foot into the public schools. We are missing an opportunity with so many Michigan kids right now because we do not have universal early childhood education for every child in this state. The first 1,000 days of your life determines your lifelong health and your lifelong wealth. And the vast majority of kids in Michigan don't get opportunities for early childhood. And we've got to fix that in Michigan. But we've got to recognize that a budget isn't just a balance sheet, it's a statement of your values. And when Rick Snyder introduced his first budget, he gave a huge business tax break, and he paid for it doing three things. One was taxing pensions. One was trying to eliminate the earned income tax credit for working people. And the third one was he cut public education to pay for it. And I vividly remember a superintendent of a school district writing to the governor saying, please declare my school district a prison. Because we spend, as Sri mentioned, $40,000 a year to incarcerate a person in Michigan and only about $10,000 a year to educate a child in Michigan. We deserve better. And I know that rural districts have been shortchanged for a long time. But the answer isn't to just divvy up the pie differently. The answer is to make education a real investment in Michigan, where we are able to make sure that the class sizes drop, that there are social workers and counselors and nurses back in the school system so that teachers can get back to the work of teaching. But it also means raising people who dedicate their lives to our kids up and treating them as professionals again. The ranks of our education staff across our state are demoralized because of a DeVos agenda for 25 years that has attacked our traditional public schools. So people ask me, how do we turn our education system around? Number one, we hire a governor who's not beholden to Betsy DeVos and family. Number two, we invest in education again. Number three, universal early childhood education for every child. And four is treating the people who dedicate their lives to our kids, the backbone of our society. We treat them as professionals and we pay them enough that they can take care of their families.
Thank you, Bill.
I've said since January that as the next governor of the state, I'm going to fundamentally change the way that we resource school districts in this state. You know, every single school district in this state needs to have the resources that are required to deliver the educational outcomes that we say are important to us. And we're not doing that today. You know, one of the things that I can sit here and say to you with all confidence is that I know what the promise of this country is. Every single one of us grew up hearing that we could have the opportunity to be whatever we were capable of being. Education has always been the primary gateway to any kind of social and economic mobility. We have closed that door, and somebody, the next governor of this state, has got to be brave enough to kick it back open and do the right thing by our children. Doesn't matter whether they live in Rochester, Birmingham, Sheboygan, or any place else in this state, they all deserve an equal opportunity, and that's not happening. I also said that we've got to be realistic. Not all of our kids want to or can afford to go to college. We've got to return things like vocational education to high schools so that kids have a gateway to a decent life. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with doing labor with your hands. I had a plumber at my house 2 weeks ago. He was there for 2 hours and he charged $500. That's a decent working life. We can do better. And fundamentally, you know, we spend a lot of time in this state talking about economic growth and, you know, creating jobs. Well, let me tell you, I was a business guy for almost 30 years. And here's what I know. The only way you create jobs, the only way you grow the economy is through consumers. If we're not educating our kids so that they can go out and make a living and have disposable income, we don't have consumers. And all the tax breaks and all the tax abatements to all the corporations don't mean a damn thing because they won't stimulate the economy. We can do better. So I've said that as the next governor, we're going to focus on making sure we're doing the right things by our children educationally. We're going to build an infrastructure model for the 21st century. We're going to create a tax policy that gives us the resources we need to get the work done. And we're going to have an environmental and water policy that protects our most important resources for this generation and generations to come.
Make the answers relatively brief if you can, guys. Thank you. And it's just to Sri. Mass murders like the one recently in Las Vegas seem to garner a lot of headlines, and deservedly so. Last talked about is the fact that Michigan has several of America's most dangerous cities. How do we tackle our violence issues?
You talk about guns issues?
Guns and violence, yes.
Well, we need to, ensure that guns don't fall into the wrong hands. We need to have plenty of background checks to ensure that the gun ownership is a privilege, it's not a right. And that needs to be handled with a great level of responsibility. And public safety in general is, we need to ensure, we want to make sure that we don't have another Flint to Michigan ever happen in Michigan again. And we want to make sure that we protect our public. We are vigilant, I will be strictly a law enforcement governor that will ensure people public safety, whether it is corporations polluting or guns in their own hands.
Thank you. Gretchen?
So you said to keep it short, so I'll do my best. But I will say that I really believe that the best way that we can tackle a lot of the issues in our society is to ensure that people have opportunity. And opportunity comes from education. It comes from giving people the skills they need so that they can pursue their dreams and make a living at it. We curtail a lot of the crime in our society when people are gainfully employed, when people have a path forward, when they have opportunity. And right now, as I said, when we talked about education, we are failing generations of young people in Michigan because we haven't given them the skills they need through the proper education, because we haven't supported them in pursuing whatever path theirs might be to doing something that they enjoy, that they can actually make a living doing. And I think when we attack those issues, it does bring down the crime rate. You see that in communities and states and countries that make education a priority. Now that won't fix the current issues that we are facing as a society, and I do think it's important that we give returning citizens skills when they are in the system so that they can be productive when they come back into communities. That is a huge contributor to the crime levels that we have, because there is no opportunity and there's no way for people to make something of themselves. But I also think that we've got to recognize responsible gun ownership has responsibilities that come with it, and it's our responsibility to ensure that people with mental health issues and criminal backgrounds don't have access to weapons, and that they're not in our schools and hospitals. But we recognize that there are a lot of responsible gun owners who are hunters in Michigan. I grew up in a household where my mother knew how to make venison chili because my stepfather was a hunter, and that's something that is a part of our culture in Michigan, but we owe it to our children, to our communities, to have responsible requirements on the books.
Thank you. Bill?
So the first thing I want to talk about is guns. In America, we have a love affair with guns. We can't have too many of them. And, we've got folks in Lansing today proposing the most nonsensical legislation I've ever seen in my life. You got folks proposing bills that would allow citizens to buy guns, not register, carry them in their car, and have no consideration for what the impact would be on the community at large. We got to stop it, folks. It's not right. And fundamentally, we talk about violence. Violence is really an indicator of something else. It's an indicator of when people don't have hope. We've got to figure out a way to return hope to our young people so they don't default to what's easy. And that's what's missing today. When everybody in this room grew up, you grew up with a sense of hope. You grew up with a sense that there was something better, that you had an opportunity to have something in life. When you don't have that, you resort to what's easy. So we got to fix that. I also fundamentally believe that the next governor of this state has got to have the courage to talk about sentencing reform. One of the realities of incarceration today is that when we put somebody in prison for greater than 10 years, if we haven't done anything in terms of providing a rehabilitative process, we might as well keep them locked up forever, because things change so fast that they don't have any connection with the real world when they come out. So we have to do better. We fundamentally got to focus on making sure that we take the incentive out of violence, and we haven't done that, but we can.
So in my opening remarks, I told you about a little boy. He was the 3-year-old son of a mother who was 21, had 4 children, and he'd met his father 4 times in his life because his dad's in jail. I want you to think about that boy's life circumstances. His probability of winding up in jail remains higher than it does of winding up in college, even if he makes it through his decrepit, underfunded school system in Detroit. Our responsibility to that boy, we are not meeting as a state. And we're not meeting that responsibility for a number of reasons. The first has a lot to do with opportunity. We are not providing that kid the opportunity to have a dignified education that grows and invests in his brain so that he has the opportunity to succeed, go off to college, learn and earn like we would want for any of our children anywhere. That is a key responsibility that we owe children like him and children like him all over the state of Michigan. It's not just an urban issue. And then the second question is about criminal justice reform, right? How is it that we agree that we are going to do the work of being able to invest in communities in ways that police with them rather than on top of them? And when we police with them, are we willing, if and when they do go to jail, are we willing to actually engage to make sure that that experience was really about corrections rather than about punishment? That that individual, like his father, has the opportunity to have a meaningful job because we've equipped him with a meaningful skill set that then he can use and stay off of the streets and build himself the kind of life that empowers his young child. And then when we think about policing in communities like that, are we willing to think about the fact that, we talked about opiates? The last time we had an epidemic of drugs like this, it was called crack, and it affected urban communities disproportionately. And in that moment, instead of having the kind of empathy that I hope we will show right now, instead we reacted with a certain level of deep anger. We built a system where we, in effect, created an on-ramp into jail for issues that really probably don't warrant it. Things like minimum sentencing, things like 3 strikes laws. The fact that an African American in our state is 3.3 times as likely to go to, or to be arrested for marijuana despite no more increase in the likelihood of using or possessing marijuana. These are issues that we have to solve. And if we are willing to solve those issues, I think the violence issue goes away, because violence is a product of deep, profound frustration in a moment of poverty where there are not opportunities other than the one that looks obvious in front of you. So when we think about that boy, we think about his father, we think about the life we want for people like him, it has everything to do with being willing to build a different path forward. That means really getting serious about education, getting serious about what we think are the causes of crime in our society, and making sure that when we have somebody and we're paying $41,000 a year, that we're actually investing it in making sure they don't come back, rather than allowing a profit motive to create the on-ramp for them to just come back once more. There's a big responsibility we have to get this right, and it's not just about law enforcement. And one more note on law enforcement. We have a sitting police chief who has called people who are peacefully protesting police brutality, degenerates and ungrateful. And she continues her role. And if nothing else, we need to be able to provide folks the dignity of knowing that their police chief doesn't think them to be lesser human beings because they are willing to stand up for their own rights. And all of this comes together in thinking about what that boy's path should be and whether or not we're willing to do the work of actually creating it.
It's 2 o'clock, I'm not sure where to get that last question. They weren't quite as fast as I was hoping for, but nevertheless, I want to thank each of you for being here. Great job. We're very, very grateful. It's not very often up here that we get this kind of turnout with candidates running for an office this high. So we're very grateful. Thank you. Outstanding job. We appreciate it.
Thank you.